there's nothing more natural, really, than being with the deceased body of your loved one. I mean, if anyone has an opportunity to jump beyond the fear of that, it is deeply like profound and natural feeling. It does not feel scary, weird, or morbid at all. In fact, it can be deeply healing through the grieving process.
Hey, I'm Tanya Wilkinson, and this is Death on the Daily, bringing the conversation about death out of the shadows and into the mainstream. Because along with birth and change, if there's one thing that's going to happen to us all, then death is it. And we're going to explore how death actually shows up for us on the daily in a multitude of ways, and how when we allow ourselves to accept and to be with death, how it can teach us a whole heap about how to live this life well. So Tree Carr is joining me today, and she is a published author and TEDx speaker who works in the field of transpersonal psychology with a focus on dreams, death, altered states of consciousness, and psychedelic-assisted therapy. And Tree's work includes being a death midwife, also known as a death doula, supporting people spiritually, emotionally, existentially, and practically at the end of their lives. And this includes the crucial work of holding individuals and communities in their grief. And Tree has actually held me in my own personal grief, as well as I've sat in sessions with Tree where it's also about holding us in our collective grief of what's happening in the world. And it was actually Tree who first gave me a glimpse of what a death doula is. And it was her encouragement to go for it that spurred me on to follow my heart and to study after my granddad died. And in amongst many other strands that weave so beautifully into the basket that is all of Tree's work and life purpose, Tree is also a high priestess, witch, and master of Wicca, a dreaming guide, and she facilitates healing sessions and tarot sessions, one of which I actually had as I was on my exit from Formula One, and that helped me to make that decision and take that leap. And yeah, Tree's work spans much, much more. But just to bring you into this space, Tree, welcome to Death on the Daily.
Yay! Thanks for having me. It's awesome. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Yay. Thank you so much, Tree. I'm so excited to have you here. And first and foremost, I thought let's root into your story, because you have got the most incredible story of how you came to your life purpose. So I would love to hear a little bit about your journey and what made you lean into Death on the Daily as a part of your work, and obviously that deep purpose that you hold in life.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for asking. It is weird when you go through your life story sometimes, hey? You just kind of go through the files, you start to see it almost like a little film, especially when you've spoken about it a few times. But I've kind of had a weird life in a way in terms of my upbringing. And all of these things come together to bring me into a pivotal moment of becoming a person who helps support those who are on the journey towards death. And so I'd say it goes way back to my formative years when I was a child. I was born in the 70s, the early 70s, 1972 to be exact. And my formative years were spent on a commune, living in a very unusual way for most people. And I think because of that, having no television, no radio, no pop culture, and just being out in nature and just, kind of like a free kid in a way, that helped set up maybe a sensitivity towards more person-centered approaches to life. And so I'd say that probably had a big impact on me initially, because when you're a child, you're being formed and it influences you, your environments influence you. And then when I was like 4 years old, I had a near-death experience. And this was something that probably really changed my life. When I was an adult, I looked back and went, wow, yeah, that had a big impact on how I roll with the topic of death. And in the experience, I had a near drowning experience in the Atlantic Ocean, and a sneaker wave had come and pulled me out into the open ocean when I was just like collecting shells on the beach. And my dad, who was wisely watching at the time, saw I was getting dragged out into the ocean. And so he started to make his way to come and get me. I didn't know it at the time because you're just thrown into this washing machine of water. And I was like frantically holding on for dear life, trying to grasp at anything that could tether me to not getting pulled out. And that included some of the legs of the dock, the big wooden dock. This is in South Carolina. And I was grabbing at the dock legs as I was being whooshed out, but I couldn't hold on, and they were all full of barnacles too. So my hands were getting sliced up by like frantically trying to grab on. So my hands were bleeding and ripped open. And it just got to a certain point, like even went beyond the dock, and it was like, okay, that's it. And I just kind of had this boundary dissolving experience of that's it. That's my life. And like a little quick succession of my life flashing before my eyes, my connection with my family, and a deep sense of love for them, and then a worry and concern for my parents, specifically that they wouldn't find my body. And I felt more concerned with them, their sadness and their grief, than myself at that time. And there was this feeling of dissolving into a peace, a sense of oneness, and a sense of everything's okay. But I had a sadness for my parents and their grief that of my death. And in those moments, I was, miraculously and thankfully saved by my father, who got out there and got me, and he pulled me out. He pulled me out onto to the shore. I was okay. I didn't need any medical assistance or anything. He just held me, and I just coughed up out of the water that was that was there in me, and I was alive. And a weird thing happened. My dad decided to he put my favorite jumper on, and I was warmed up, and then he decided to go get his camera and take a photo of me. And he took a photo of me, and the photo ended up obviously being in the family album for years. And it's such a haunting photo. And I remember when I was a teenager, I asked him, I was like, Dad, why did you take a photo of me right after like nearly drowning? And he said, oh, I wanted to, remember that moment, but also I was so intrigued by your eyes. Your eyes looked so bizarre and so surreal. So I wanted to take a photo because your eyes, and if you see this photograph, you can see what my dad meant by that, because my eyes are like black, like deep voids in this photograph that are so there's something really kind of wild. Oh, I have the photo here. So I I have this photo to remind me, because I was literally looked into the face of death.
Wow.
Can you see my eyes?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
They almost look like, in a horror film when you have a creepy child that has black eyes and they put the black contact lenses in. Tho those are my, eyes that reflect, and that's me on the beach. And so that point forward, if I look back on my life, that moment and that experience paved the way for the work that I ended up eventually doing as a death doula. So my father is an amazing person. He is a very intuitive and sensitive person, and someone who's deeply connected to their dreams and their the realms of spirit. So I do feel like I am so grateful that he took a photo in that moment. He knew, because it would impact my future me. Because as a death doula, what I've been shown over and over and over again is when I sit with people who are dying, I need to sit with them as the 4-year-old version of myself. And so every time I see this image, it reminds me of who is meant to come forward in those moments. And it's this little one here who's still here in me. And so I'm so grateful for my dad for, almost like precognitively, taking a photo of that, because it's with me always now. I wouldn't have maybe even remembered much of it, but because he took the photo, it will never forget. And because my eyes looked into the face of death, I'm able to sit with others and connect. They are the windows of the soul, and they do mean that you are there. Having looked into the void was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm grateful for it to happen when I was 4 years old. From that point onwards, my relationship with death changed. I realized that there's more to things. My consciousness went to another place. I looked through the tunnel into the vortex, into the void, but I was still there. I was still there, you see, and I was still there. So there's some interesting possibilities. And so from that point onward, I had this comfortable relationship with death. Several years later, about 4 years later after this event, my grandfather died, and he died quite young. But I felt very comfortable when my mother explained to me that my grandfather died. I was like super calm, and I was like, I understood. I know where he went. I know that there's no, I just understand the zone. Like he's just in the other room. And even at his wake, it was an open casket wake, felt very comfortable going up to my grandfather and touching him and holding his hand and you know, much to the freaked outedness of my older relatives. Oh, you can't do that. Don't do that. And so I felt comfortable with that. And then as I grew up, I found myself in very pivotal moments where I was really there for people with death. My best friend at the time as a teenager, her father was dying of cancer, and I felt very comfortable helping her and just being with her compassionately. And I felt very comfortable in the funeral and all the spaces that the hospital, everything around that. As a teenager too, my granny and my grandmother, or my granny and my mother, would go to funerals and wakes, and I'd be like, "Can I come?" And they'd be like, "All right, you big weirdo." And so I went to countless wakes and funerals for the elderly friends of my parents and my grandmother, and I felt totally chill in all of those zones. I always felt like those zones I should be in. Then weird stuff started happening, Tanya, weird stuff when I was 17. When I was 17, there was like a series of events started to happen, and they've been following my whole life, about 4 to 5 times a year when I'm just out in public walking around. I seem to be the first person there at the site or a scene of an accident, and the first person there to run over and help the person or call 911 or do CPR or give them comfort. Like this has happened countless of times. The first time it happened, I was 17. It was with a guy on a motorbike who got hit by a big truck, and he got flown right in front of me and my friend. And he was flown, and we ran over and stayed with him and helped him. And then it just kept happening and happening, where I would be there when someone's like crushed by a bus, someone's hit by a car, when someone's been knocked off their bike, when someone's fallen with an epileptic seizure right in front of me in a train station, when someone's collapsed into my arms in a public place. Like it's unprecedented and uncanny how many times this has happened. It got to the certain point where my friends and partner were like, this is really weird. Every time we go out with you, there's some kind of thing goes down, and it's like really like happening right in front of you. And I started getting this complex, like I'm some kind of weird omen, that, the child who looked into the face of death. Now anyone who comes near her, it's going to happen to them, And so, I tell you, this can build such a huge complex within someone's head. That's not very positive, right? So then and it's like crazy how crazy some of these things are. Like, I'll give you one craziest example. Walking down Carnaby Street in, Christmas time, it was really busy time, crowded streets, and all of a sudden this man in front of me stops and then begins to fall backwards into my arms. And I'm like, what? And I hold him and he's fully collapsing. And I look and he's got a needle coming out of his arm. And this person literally like shot heroin up as he was walking down Carnaby Street and started having an overdose. And then he started having literally an overdose in my arms. And, of course, we're like, me and my partner are like, what the hell? And like, called 999 really quickly. And because it was Christmas, very fast, like prompt for services. They had people on call at Christmas and they saved his life. It was amazing. But I was just like, I'm telling you, it is really weird. I could write a whole blog spot on all of the strange things that have happened. Anyway, at the age of 40, it happened. And I was like, this is just too much. And I was walking down Broadway Market in London, and it was a beautiful October Monday morning, crisp, sunny, pure blue sky, not a cloud. And I was walking down a crowded Broadway Market, and this gentleman in front of me, who looked like he kind of stumbled and struggled and like leaned against the wall. And I thought, oh, he was a big guy. So I just helped steady him up. I went behind him and went, oh my God, are you okay? Do you want to sit down? And he just started collapsing. He was a big guy. So it was like, whoa. And a bunch of us helped him fall to the ground effectively. And he was having a massive cardiac arrest. So it was a really scary situation. And he was quickly turning purple, like really going through the whole physical stress of having your heart stop. And we were just desperately trying to give him CPR, and the whole works. People were on the phones trying to call help. And he sadly took his last breath while he was in my arms. I was saying, it's okay. You're not alone. You are not alone. Don't be afraid. Help is coming. You're not alone. And as that was happening, he was looking up straight into that beautiful sunny October sky, and tears were just streaming down his face, eyes fixed, wide open. And he took his last breath, the last breath leaving, which is such a thing to experience. That last breath, it's like an exit. And I don't know what he was seeing at that time, but it was moving him to tears. It was absolutely wild. And sadly, it took a very long time for the emergency services to come. And he passed away. Like, I held him and we were there. And then finally the paramedics came and they worked literally 20 minutes with the defibrillator trying to revive him. But it was a bit late. It was too late. And a very difficult thing with this situation is that unbeknownst to us, his family had been walking ahead in the market, his mother and his wife and his daughter. And at one point, I guess they were like, "Where's Dad? Where is he?" And they came back, paced back through the market and to that scene of him having died there right on the pavement, and with the paramedics now there, and they just lost it. Of course, you would, right? Absolute shock. So I stayed and held them and hugged them, and I stayed with them all afternoon in the best way that I could until, there wasn't much more you can do. I gave them my phone number and I said, I can continue to help you if you like. They never did call me, but that was just like, okay, what the hell? This sort of thing keeps happening to me. And I asked my dreams that night, like, what is going on here? Because I'm really freaked out that this kind of weird stuff keeps happening to me. And I feel like, am I cursing people or something? And as I woke up in the morning, I had a quick succession of dream images of all of the times my whole life, like where I've had these death things going on. And it was like accumulated to this moment of a eureka where I felt like the universe said, Tree, wake up. This keeps happening to you because you are meant to be doing this work. This is a role that you are meant to be in for helping people. And so I woke up and I was like, what kind of job is that? Because I've never heard of any kind of job like that. I'm not a paramedic. I'm not a nurse. So I haven't been doing any of that kind of stuff. I know how to do CPR and I've done all like the minimal things, but mostly I've jumped into action to help these people feel safe and feel not alone and feel supported. I'm doing like an emotional, energetic thing. So I was like, okay, maybe there's a job for that. So I got online and I went to Google and I typed in emotional support at death because that's the only thing I could think of what I was doing. And when I pressed return, I got all of this information about the death doula, the death midwife, the person-centered approach to holding space for someone who is in the zones of death. And I went to the website and I was like, I got to get this training. I was like vibrating, like, this is what I meant to do. And then I signed up for the training immediately and got in there. And, the rest is history. Now I've been doing that work, for over a decade. And that's how I became a death midwife. So it's a long story. It's a weird one. But sometimes we have to go through these, we have to get the memo, and the universe certainly gave me the memo, and I'm doing this work.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Tree. And I love that around getting the memo. And I know obviously you are so intuitive and you really inspired me as well in my journey when I look at those synchronicities between sort of, that getting the memo. And then when I got that memo and it was you who inspired me into, there's a thing called a death doula. And then it was that memo came through of actually, I just lost my granddad and I loved companioning him particularly in his final few days. And then I remember I came to, because I was death curious at that point, and I was sort of like, through you, I attended some of your lectures on grief and the catharsis in grief. And I remember saying to you, I'm thinking of applying to where I think it's where you studied, isn't it? Living Well, Dying Well. And you said, go for it. And then literally the next day, I got an email from them saying, we've just opened the doors for our next foundation cohort. I was like, that's so funny, isn't it? The universe has pushed me into that space.
I love that, Tanya. I mean, I'm so happy that you got the memos too. And I was more than happy to excitedly kind of cheer you on, because it's like, I know how it can be, especially in these zones of death, which are, most people go, ooh, freaky, and like they don't want to even go there, or it's just kind of morbid to them. But I find that death is so not that way at all. I find it life-affirming. I find it transformative. It is a game changer. When you start working with death as your teacher, you just live a more connected, vibrant life as a result.
That connected, vibrant life that comes. I can definitely attest to that. And everything that you shared, and actually even how you speak to your story, really resonates with, because I know, and again, I learned this through you about death positivity. Hadn't heard of that before. And I think actually, do you literally have the t-shirt with death positive on it? Or if I've dreamt that, has that been something that I've made up?
You know what I've got, Tanya? I've got like this happy tie-dyed multicolored t-shirt. And then I took a black magic marker and I just wrote death across it, because I'm like, it just speaks for itself, this really bright, positive, happy t-shirt with the word death. And it's like, that's my t-shirt of death positivity that I made, because I was just like, because death is, life affirming, and we can be advocates for it to be positive. It doesn't have to be scary or all po-faced and depressing and morbid. It's it's a big part of our life. It is part of our journey.
I love that. Yeah, that is exactly the t-shirt that I've seen that is so death positive embodied. And to that point around death as a part of life, where do you think we as humans, I mean, this is a very big question, but where do you think we as humans have gone wrong? Why do we, well, and I say this in the Western world, obviously I know that that's not universal, but why do we in, I guess, dominant Western culture push death into the shadows behind closed doors, avoid it? You know, it's almost like if you speak to death, it's catching it. I'm going to get sick and I'm going to die as a result. Like where does this come from?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, people think you just say the word death and it's contagious. Oh no, I'm going to die. And it's like, well, yeah, you are eventually at one point. So but yeah, why do we have superstition and all this weirdness around death? So in the West, particularly, I think that we have this disconnect from death because we have a disconnect from nature. I really think that they go hand in hand. And the reason why we have a disconnect from nature in the West is because we live in a highly industrialized, consumerist, capitalistic construct. And with that capitalistic, industrialized complex that we live in, there is a separation from nature. If you think about the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people were forced out of the lands, forced out of their connection and symbiotic relationship with nature, with the farms, with the farmland, with the commons, and kind of forced into cities to work factories and to start, what we know now as this propped up capitalist system that we live in. And within that system, which we're born into now, so we don't even know any better, we don't have this connection to nature. So nature is a big teacher. When we were closer to nature, we were closer to the language of nature. In the language of nature, we see the themes of the life, death, and rebirth cycle. We see it through the seasons, with spring and then moving into summer and then autumn, the decay and the ending of things, and winter, the death of things, and then rebirth again in the spring. This is part of our awareness constantly if we're living symbiotically and closely with nature. It's just scientifically there for us to observe all the time. And part of that too is that we had more of a kinship approach to death. An elder relative would die. We would be at home with that elder relative, taking care of them. And we would be tending to their needs, honoring the dying process. People died at home under the care of the elder women in the household. Their bodies were then prepared and the rituals were done. They were often buried in a very natural way, just in the earth, just that was kind of somewhere close by. And so we were connected to the human process as well. Now, in the Industrial Revolution and the rise of, commerce and the economy and the medical system, as well as in the United States, we had the Civil War, which was a great catalyst for the funeral homes and the funeral parlors, because there was, huge amounts of deaths. There would be a whole family would be wiped out. So you couldn't have everybody at home in their bodies at home. So there was the rise of the funeral parlor where people's bodies went to, and then you had the technology of embalming and preserving that rose out of the Civil War. And so you had this whole other, group of middlemen that took care of the death things. And it was a great chance to make a lot of money, because it ended up being the middlemen who took on the tasks and, of course, charged a pretty penny for this. And that's why we have the funeral industry we do today. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, the death business. And so this is why we are disconnected from death. Now, we live in a highly medicalized world too. So we're like, oh, someone dies, it's like creepy, and it's hospitals. And it's like, someone dies, it's a pulled curtain and it's all hushed tones, and like, someone else deals with that. And so because of that, it's an unknown. People think, dead body, rigor mortis, zombies, decay, and they just don't understand the biological process of death. Like, people don't realize that you can keep someone at home for honoring services 3 days after their death. If you're in the right settings, right conditions, a cooler room, an ice pack on the person, and you can have them there for a while. A lot of people think that as soon as you die, all of a sudden you're like, you it's like terrible things are happening, smells and all kinds of stuff. So that's not necessary. So there's a lot of misinformation. People don't understand. But back in just a few centuries ago, we all had this knowledge because all the women in the family would deal with these things, and we knew how to approach them. So I think that creates a lot of fear and trepidation around death, and people don't want to know about it because it's not in our day-to-day awareness through nature or through a hands-on, personable approach because of the Western system that we live in. So those are my theories. I don't know if those theories are correct, but that's my observation anyway, my 2 cents worth. If it's worth anything, I don't know.
That's worth a lot. And I can definitely resonate with so much of that. And nature is your teacher. I think it's so profound because actually that was as I started to get death curious and enter into, I think I was I did your astrology course, and then I was like, oh, let me start to see, what else does Tree do? And then I was like, oh, okay, death doula, what's this? Started to get death curious, started to read books. But actually nature is a really big teacher. And I remember that first autumn and winter cycle after I got death curious, and just being outside, observing what's going on in nature, seeing that happening all around me started to really, contextualize and ground me into it. And then, like you shared around the hands-on side of things, I think that is where there's a huge amount of, I guess, avoidance, reticence. Because, you're right. If you haven't witnessed it in your home, if that's not been your lived experience, I mean, it definitely runs through all of our ancestral lines. But if in this lifetime we haven't experienced it, of course it's going to be like absolutely terrifying. Yeah. And in your experience working with people as a death doula, as a death midwife, do you experience that, I guess, that initial avoidance? And actually, what's that process to get people to, I suppose, step over those thresholds of, for example, being with the dead body of someone who they loved? Because my experience is, as soon as I stepped over those thresholds, it's actually really quite joyful on the other side. It's almost that avoidance that turns it into that area of terror and fear. So what's your experience there of helping people to gently step into that, I guess, that comfort with death?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because it when it is an unknown, it is scary. Any unknown is scary. And then also, it doesn't help when we have things like, movies and Netflix series and horror films that show corpses or bodies, and like so we have a lot of cultural ideas about these things, which can feel scary and weird. But there's nothing more natural, really, than being with the deceased body of your loved one. If anyone has an opportunity to jump beyond the fear, that it is deeply, like, profound and natural feeling. It does not feel scary, weird, or morbid at all. In fact, it can be deeply healing through the grieving process. Studies show that those who are able to have closure with the body, with the presence of their deceased loved one, those who are able to see, touch, feel more, and have grief over the body, have more of a chance to move through grief in a transformative way, to alleviate grief, than those who don't have closure, those who don't see the the body, don't see their loved one. They just hear of the news, but there's no physical connection. So there are studies around that it is deeply therapeutic to the grieving process. But little things that you can do if you feel that you're like, I can't do that. I find it very challenging. I don't know if I could go and be with someone on their deathbed or be with a dead body after someone's passed. Ways you can get past that is to sit with the reality of your own immortality and your own body and your own death. So, to really focus first on yourself. And this is part of the training at Living Well, Dying Well, as you'll remember, Tanya. One of the things that we have to do in the training as a death doula or a death midwife is to sit with the reality of your own death. Yes, it will happen one day. There will be lots of different feelings that come up, fear included, sadness, sometimes a boundary dissolving ego, your ego starts to dissolve. But to sit with that in reflection is quite a task. Sometimes it can be with a meditation or with some journaling and reflecting, and just to write out your feelings or talk with a trusted friend. And then when you move beyond that, you can start to say things like, when I die, I would like this to happen. Perhaps these would be my plans for my body. Maybe you want to be cremated. Maybe you want to be wearing like your favorite outfit. Maybe you want your nails done. Who knows, right? But have these kind of conversations, and then talk about what you'd like to do for a funeral or a memorial, and start to put your own creativity into it. When you approach your own death in a positive lens with the feeling of agency, then it makes it easier for you to step into the zones of other people's deaths. So it all starts with you, really. And there's just very small ways you can do it. And it doesn't have to be scary. You could do it with a friend too. And you could have a little practice session of talking about death and just saying what you'd like to have happen.
I love that, doing it with someone in connection. And I think that community is so important. Again, we live in such an individualistic society where we're just in our little silos and our little bubbles and dealing with and burying all this anxiety and fear. But actually, to your point, have that conversation with someone else. That's what I loved in the training, because I remember being like, there was that part of me that was like, oh God, we came to that bit of, okay, what are your wishes in dying and death? And actually it is, you can be, it sounds weird, but it's actually quite fun because you can be creative, and even that thought of actually having that now written out where my loved ones know where that is means that I hopefully have a good chance of being able to die looking out of the window at a tree and surrounded by nature and all of those that I love, versus being in a hospital. And that sort of, again, that conveyor belt of dying and death just sort of taking over. And similarly on the other side, then I remember in the training, one of the teachers said, this is the greatest gift you can give to your family. Think about what they'll be going through once you've died, once you've gone. And actually they were like, if you can give them that gift of, these are my wishes, you don't have to think about it, you don't have to argue and say, I know what she wants better than what you do. It's really empowering and really wonderful. And I'd say as well, for me, having done, I created a birth and death plan for my daughter, knowing that she was going to die and then be born. And again, I remember sitting there being like, oh God, I can't, this is like a night. Again, it was that nightmare. This is a nightmare. This is like, I couldn't think of anything worse. And as soon as I put pen to paper and started, it's amazing what flows. And then I can sort of call myself out on that avoidance actually that was holding me back and trying to just disconnect me in that moment. So yeah, I can definitely attest to that, and definitely do it in conversation with someone else is such a brilliant piece of advice.
That's wonderful, Tanya. I'm so happy for you to be able to move through those processes that way. And I love your example of how you want to die, because it's exactly the same as mine. I just really want to be in nature too. And that's the zone. Like, I don't want to be in like some fancy room, or even, well, of course not a hospital room, but I definitely want to just be in the natural setting. So it's interesting too, because you realize if that's where you want to be at death, then maybe that's where you want to be at life too. Like that's what it told me. That's what it told me. So I literally try to get out into nature as much as I can. I'm always going on hikes. Like I'm always hiking, or I just need to be out in the lands. So in doing that exercise, it really made me realize about how I want to live. Why should I have that on the moment of death? I want that every day. So it's really cool towards your priorities, you know?
I absolutely love that, Tree, because, and it's true. I mean, the institute where we studied is called Living Well, Dying Well, and it really is that in, you know, I think really rooting into death and dying, that teaches us so much about how to live this life well. Exactly to your point, doing that exercise can make you go, okay, yeah, this is where I do want to spend my time. I want to prioritize that time out in nature, or even, yeah, because you also look at the little things of, you know, what do you want to be eating and who do you want to be surrounded with? Again, it can really help to crystallize, where am I spending my time that's maybe
100%.
not in alignment. Also, I suppose one thing that I wanted to speak to as well today is around catharsis, because that's something that I've really, really integrated from your work and from sitting in your lectures and in your groups, is around the importance of catharsis. And again, and I guess the pushing death into the shadows, how also that catharsis has been pushed into the shadows, that sort of, you know, you should be over it, or, you know, don't let it out, don't wail. And I feel really called to speak to this, because actually it was your lectures and talking to catharsis and showing those examples that when I was in the hospital for the stillbirth of my daughter, that gave me that permission to wail, to let it out, to be really primal and just let my body do what it was feeling called to in any one moment. And to the point where there was one midwife who came in, and bless her, I cannot fault her. I absolutely adore the NHS. But she's obviously of a generation where it was very much that, you know, don't cry. And she said that to me. She says, oh, don't cry, at a point where I was absolutely wailing. But I remembered, because of your lecture and then going through Living Well, Dying Well as well, that gave me permission to say, no, I need to express this right now. Please do not stop me. So I just wanted to hear any of your thoughts around catharsis and, yeah, the importance of catharsis when we are going through that mourning period in our grief.
Tanya, my heart goes out to you for your experience, and I just send you love for that continued journey through that experience. It's amazing that you just listen to your body. I feel so honored that you remember my lecture in those moments of how important the death wail is. And I feel really moved by hearing that. Thank you. And I'm just so happy that that was able to help you in that moment. And I do feel for you to have a midwife tell you to not cry. My heart like breaks open just hearing that. And I know they're trying to do that because they don't want to disturb the other patients, or, you know, they have their reasons, I'm sure. But it's just, this is a prime example of what we're missing in this world and the medical system. And bless them, they're just trying to keep order and calm in the hospital. But it's just, this is what's gravely wrong. Sorry for the pun, with the system, you know, because we have this other part of ourselves, the emotional body, that needs to have a catharsis. Now, the catharsis, basically, the Greek word catharsis means a cleanse, to purge. When we have a shock, a death, a grief, a shock, the body goes into its natural state of catharsis, purge, cleanse, to bring back homeostasis of your nervous system. It's a completely natural and normal thing to do. In fact, when we don't allow for, if we repress it and push it down, do you know how much energy that takes to hold back tears and crying? You know, when people say, I'm choked up, it literally, you feel like you're being choked. You are blocking a process, physical process, emotional and energetic process of the body, and this does great damage to the to the body as well. Yeah, it takes great effort to punch down tears and cry, and so I just lament the whole thing here in the West, where we're told to stiff upper lip, don't cry, don't make a scene. You're not making a scene. You're going through a very natural thing. And so I am a big supporter and advocate of catharsis and the death wail and letting it rip, basically, when you're feeling all the feelings. So science backs it up that when we are about to cry, our heart level rises, our stress levels go up, adrenaline, and the body wants to purge to bring back homeostasis. So after crying, whew, you know how it feels after a good cry. You're like, if you feel peace. And so it's really, really, really necessary. I'm an advocate for doing this. Of course, some people do it naturally, like for you, a natural response after having your incident with your experience. It was a natural response, totally natural. And for some people, they want to lean into it a little bit too, because they feel blocked. They feel like they can't. So I feel like there's spaces for people to come and grieve. I try to do this from time to time. I'll do pre-grief spaces online. I've got like grief retreats that are in the making for 2025, where people can come and be in a safe physical space to move through a grieving process with some of these techniques and practices, and also one-on-one sessions where I've worked with people and we've moved through wailing together. You know, we've allowed space to just wail and cry, and those are the kind of zones that I feel that we need as well, because everybody is like experiences their loss and then they're back to work on Monday. It's crazy. It's crazy. People don't have the grieving time. They can't afford it. It's the system we live in. And so I'm really into making spaces for people to come to be able to do this. And there's other ways to do it. Is catharsis isn't just wailing and crying and grieving like that. There's physical things you can do. It's there's dancing, there's shaking, there's movement. You can shake out your catharsis. There's so many examples through various times in history and various cultures that do this. There's tons of examples that were in that lecture that you attended, where you can work through catharsis around grief and loss, and it's so helpful.
Oh, I love that, Tree. And that all of that inspiration from cultures that we've been severed from, I think is so important, because that was one of the hooks that really inspired me. Was I think you shared, is it South Indian? I forget. Yeah. And it was around the singing, the catharsis, it was the chanting. And that was something as well, because my mum's Sri Lankan. So, it just made me again think, okay, it just rooted me into little parts of potentially of what my culture was that I've been severed from. And again, all of that just gave me that inspiration when I was in my journey to say, actually, yeah, like, let me just see where my body goes. I'm definitely of the stiff upper lip British side of, like when my granddad died, it was very like that, everybody at the funeral, you could see that choking, fighting back the tears. But actually for me with my daughter, it was like, no, I'm going to do things differently this time. I'm going to let it flow. So yeah, all my gratitude to you and all of those cultural connections you're weaving.
There's so many. And that great example of South India and the beautiful songs of lament that the women do. And they sing the person's story. They sing their feelings towards the person. And I've got goosebumps just, thinking about it, because I show an example clip in my lecture of a woman doing it. And it is so, people at the lecture, everyone sobs. I do say before the lecture, this could make you cry, so just be aware. And then even in my own culture, because I'm Celtic, the keening that is in the Celtic culture, keening is a form of vocal lament, and it comes with singing, and there's also like a ow, like a kind of howling that happens with the keening too, and also song, super important. And um, a part of my work, I hold space for people's funerals, and so I conduct the funeral, and I do some words, and I do ritual as well. I always bring in song. I always sing, and when I sing, and I'm not the best singer, I'm just like, I just gotta do it. I have played in bands and stuff like that over the years, but I'm no like Billie Eilish or something, you know. So I do just like sing in my very modest kind of way. Whenever I bring song into the mix, it releases everybody's hearts, and everyone is in tears. And they're not in tears because I have a voice of an angel. There's no way I do. It's just the power of song, the power of melody, the power of music, and that sentiment. It just explodes people's hearts and their process into grief. So I am absolutely all about the sound as well.
Oh, I love that, Tree. And I'm definitely not a good singer at all, but you just made me think, actually, even after my granddad died, I remember I was doing just some online kirtan, and as part of my reconnection to the roots. But I remember there was one where, again, I just went with it and was just singing. And I was like, "What?" I mean, I don't think I was, if anyone was listening, I don't think I was singing very well. But in my mind, it was that like real, like spiritual connection. It was just like channeling through me, all of that grief just coming out and flowing, and the tears and the songs, and absolutely amazing. And I think that cultural reconnection to your roots is such, I mean, that's the embodiment, I think, of what you're doing. It's really around reconnecting us to, our severance from nature, to our roots, to all of these traditions that we've lost. So I would say as well, for anyone out there as well, like, look into your roots. What's in there?
100%, because you'll be surprised what's there. It's really incredible. And this is something that is very human. It's human. So embrace it. It's wonderful.
I love that. It's so human, and all those interconnections between all of us, all our cultures, our traditions. Absolutely beautiful. So when we embrace death in the daily, and honestly, Tree, I could talk to you. I could make this into a 4-hour podcast. I could just keep going and going. But when we embrace death on the daily, we see how everything in this life is impermanent. And hopefully, for any listeners out there, as you've seen, actually, there's a huge heap of joy that can come from embracing that impermanence, speaking to death. I literally, anyone who's watching this will see I've just had a big smile on my face for the whole of this conversation, because it's so empowering. But as much as this conversation has been an absolute joy, it's now time to bring it to a purposeful ending. So before we do, Tree, I would love for you to share any final words that you feel called to around how our listeners can embrace their death on the daily, anything else that you feel has been unsaid, as well as sharing anything that you wish to around your offerings and where our listeners can connect with you.
Yeah, so just some takeaway messages. Hey, everybody. Every single day that you roll through the mundane of life, there's always little endings that pop up all the time that you don't even realize. Little endings all the time. Now, a really good way to start with being comfortable with endings is simply watching the sunset. Try to have a little practice of watching the sunset every night. When you watch the sunset, this is an ending, but that ending is so beautiful, right? The sunset, it just all the glorious colors, all the different wash of colors and shapes that you see in the sky, and just be mindfully with it. This is an ending. Interesting. How does it make you feel? You might feel sad that the day is ending, but you might also feel gratitude towards how the day went, and also just the beauty of this ending of the sun going down. But also realize that it's going to be popping up again in the morning as a rebirth too. So there's always a cycle to be able to witness, and you can witness it in your own life, and you can connect to it in a very natural way by watching the sunset. That's a good starting point with being comfortable with endings and reflecting. If you'd like to connect more with me too, I have some offerings coming up. Yes. There's tons. I'll mention ones that have to do with grief. So I don't know when this podcast will be airing, but the autumn months are coming, and I always love to have things offered in the autumn months because it reflects the dying of the season and the going into a death, so to speak. So look out on my Instagram, also my website too, for workshops and lectures around topics of death and dying that I'll have on offer over the autumn months. And then look forward also to 2025, exciting uh, retreat that will be on offer for those who are moving through grief and loss. And it's at an amazing and wonderful place that we're sowing the seeds to making this happen. There's a wonderful woman called Charlotte Church. She is known mostly for her career in music, but she's also a wonderful woman of spirit and magic and nurturing energy. And she's created this beautiful place in Wales called The Dreaming. And it is a wonderful place of retreat in the middle of Wales, a gorgeous location where you can go and be nurtured, connect to the land, and connect to a process. So we're currently planting the seeds for a grief retreat there in 2025 with myself and another death midwife who works at The Dreaming to create a beautiful space for people who have gone through loss to come and feel nurtured and learn tools to be able to move through your process of bereavement. So I'm very excited about that. I feel like that will be a wonderful thing to support people next year.
Thank you so much, Tree. We'll put all the links in the show notes. And I would say as well, this is just a tiny little taster of everything that Tree does as well. So check out Tree's social media and all of her offerings, because I have sampled many of them across all the different interwoven intersections. And honestly, your work is truly incredible. And as well for me and my nature connection journey as well, you've really, really inspired me. So I'm so grateful to you, Tree, on like many layers. And I'm really excited as well to get stuck into some of your death and grief offerings as well as the nights draw in and we go into that autumn winter cycle.
And look out for them, folks, because some of them I like to offer free stuff too, because not everybody has the budget to do all of these things. So I do offer free spaces for people to come, because I do a lot of compassion work as part of this role, because I don't think that you have to pay for everything. Some people can afford it, but do you know what I mean? It's really important to have some compassion work in this line of work. So do look out for free offerings for those of you who are unemployed or, that you don't have it in your budget. So thank you so much, Tanya. I am so grateful for our conversation and so moved by your words too. So thank you so much for the kind, encouraging words that you brought to me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tree. All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's something inside, and we'll never make